My semester-long D&D campaign is coming to a close next weekend, and it went really well. Uh, it was with a bunch of people I've never met before. I've been thinking about some of the things I did right, some of the things that made this game unique, that I can replicate in future games of mine. One of my favorite things that I did in this game was using the genre that inspired it to sort of build out the lore. Um, I have a lot of opinions about stories, genre specifically. Like, I love genre and tropes. My primary that's not how you say that word. My primary creative outlet, since I was like 10, has been D&D, or tabletop games. And I think there's certain certain differences that make it difficult to carry other storytelling techniques over into that medium, because everything is just like, there's a lot of mediums that are just words, but this is specifically just your pal Dave at the head of the table with a bunch of dice. Like, it's hard to do horror in this medium, because they know you, and they know there's not actually a monster. They know it's just you sitting at the head of the table goofing around. So, in order to sort of combat a lot of these differences that tabletop games have as a creative medium, I've developed a very heavy dependence on tropes and genre as a way to quickly get across what the vibe is supposed to be. I haven't run a traditional fantasy campaign since I was maybe 15. Um, Everything's weird homebrew stuff. And in order to get into the headspace for a new game, I found that it's really important to find concrete inspirations, and genres. I think that the purpose of genres is just like collections of tropes that are often found together. And so taking inspiration in the form of genre allows you to get across the proper mindset to your players and really set the stage for a well written collaborative story. Because in tabletop, you're not in control, you're like really dependent on the players to supply what the actual plot is going to be. It's just your job to maintain internal consistency and give them twists to keep it interesting. um, Having everyone be on the same page about what the story's supposed to be is incredibly important. And I think that the genre that you decide on as a group is one of the like core foundations that the campaign has to be built on. Of course, this is only if you're like taking it seriously. If you just want to kill monsters, you don't have to do any of this artsy fartsy storytelling stuff. So, I've been talking for way too long. The point that I was trying to eventually get to was, the campaign that I just ran was like alternate 1890s, like Victorian Gothic cathedrals, bowler hats, spooky, like serial killers, Jack the Ripper shit. Um, it was very inspired by Gothic literature, which is like a branch of Romanticism. It's all about superstition and nature, and specifically like an obsession with the past and the consequences of the past, which is why there are so many ghost stories in there. Um, the movement gets its name from the obsession with Gothic cathedrals and all of this weird witchcraft stuff they had going on. Frankenstein, Dracula, you get the vibe. Um, which is the point, which is why genres are so important. Um, but what I did for this campaign, that was really cool, was Like Victorian England had so many superstitions, and they were so fascinated by death. And so the core mystery of this campaign that the players took, months and months trying to work out was that the like core of the magic in this world, the thing that made it fantasy rather than just, real historical like Victorian London, was that belief could subtly influence reality, right? In the beginning of the game, they were delving into these like themed dungeons. There was one for rain, there was one for time, there was one for song, and they were beginning to realize as they went through here that these were like created by essentially this world's version of ancient Greek gods. Uh, as like a final act. People stopped believing in these gods, they lost their power, and then as they were like lashing out in death, they created these like cathedral temples to themselves, like deep underground. It was really cool. It was really tropey, and it was really cool. Um, but they went and fought these things called angels, and they were collecting like all the different relics that were like the tombstones of these gods. And eventually they found some academic society in the big city, and they caught on to the idea that belief influenced reality, and that the culture of this place had become so fascinated with death and so grim and dreary all the time that they were actually creating a harder world to live in. Like they were making their lives more difficult via this like very pessimistic worldview, right? Which made sense within the confines of the magic system, but was also the theme. Stories have a lot of rules, in the same way that reality has rules, I guess, if you want to call them that. Like, if a guy gets shot, he goes to the hospital, and whether or not he lives is dependent on, like, where the bullet hit, and, like, what kind of gun it was, and like, how quick he got to the hospital. And in stories, the rules are completely different. When someone gets shot, their percent chance, their like likelihood of survival is determined by how close to the end of their arc they were. How much screen time they've had, how likable they've been made to the audience, how much are they at fault, right? Like, did they make a decision some point along the line where they knew death was an option, and they made, because it's a story, it's about decisions. But so these rules that influence the course of the story are very subject to what tone, what genre you're playing in. Whether you incorporate the thematic touchstones of your story like directly into the magic system or otherwise like workings of the world doesn't really matter. Either way, the tropes and the genre are going to govern the interactions of your world on a very micro scale. Whether or not a character survives is always going to be subject to what the expectations set at the beginning of the story were and how those stakes have evolved. But by incorporating that directly into the way your world works, you can create a really cool sort of harmony and symmetry with your like fantasy world design and with the actual plot of the story you're trying to tell. Which to me is the point of fantasy storytelling, I kind of don't like that the word fantasy has just been taken to mean like elves and dwarves and orcs. Fantasy means a world where the rules have been changed the physical rules of the world have been changed to better fit the thematic premise and the internal struggles of the characters that you're going to be following throughout the story. Anyway, I'm a crazy person, and I just rambled about Gothic literature and magic systems and other nonsense for about 30 minutes because I'm insane. Thanks for watching, I guess, if anyone watched this. I I'm in college now. I'm trying to do more of these. I already ramble to uh, my friends to an annoying amount about this kind of stuff. So finding a better place to put all of my nonsensical thoughts would be nice. Um, I don't want to tell people to subscribe. I've like barely done anything, but do whatever you want.